At the top of a luxurious hotel, a man's fate changes when he crosses paths with a child whose eyes see beyond. Her silent warning prevents a tragedy and begins a journey blending mystery, loss, and revelation. Each drawing of the girl unveils fragments of a past erased by lies. If you were touched by this beautiful story of resilience and love, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. Richard Calloway exhaled deeply as the elevator ascended to the top floor of the Elysian, one of Manhattan's most exclusive hotels. The digital display counted the floors silently as he loosened his tie, the weight of the day's meetings still pressing on his shoulders. At 52, Richard had built Calloway Enterprises into a technology empire spanning 3 continents. But success had come at a cost. The loneliness of his penthouse suite awaited him, just as it did every night. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the penthouse level. Richard stepped out, nodding to the security guard stationed in the corridor. A standard procedure for the Elysian's VIP guests. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the marble floor as he walked toward his suite, mind already drifting to the conference call with Tokyo scheduled for the early hours. As he approached his door, fumbling for the keycard in his pocket, a movement in his peripheral vision caused him to freeze. From the shadow of a decorative alcove, a small figure emerged. A girl no older than 10 stood barefoot in the dimly lit hallway. Her clothes were worn and mismatched, a faded blue sweater several sizes too large, and jeans with frayed hems. Dark circles underlined her eyes, which seemed to belong to someone far older than the child before him. "Don't go in there," she whispered, her voice unnervingly calm. "They're waiting for you." Richard blinked, momentarily stunned by the girl's unexpected appearance in this secured area. "Excuse me? How did you get up here?" Instead of answering, she stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "Please, Mr. Calloway, don't open that door. They want to take you." A chill ran through him. The security guard had mysteriously disappeared from his post, he realized. And how did this child know his name? Before he could question her further, a muffled thud came from inside his suite, followed by whispered voices. Richard stepped back from the door, instinctively positioning himself between the child and whatever threat might emerge. His mind raced through possibilities: corporate espionage, competitors seeking leverage, or worse. The hotel's security system was supposedly state-of-the-art, yet someone had obviously breached it. "The cameras aren't working," the girl whispered, as if reading his thoughts. "The emergency stairs are that way." She pointed toward the end of the hallway. Without waiting for his response, she gripped his wrist with surprising strength and pulled him toward the stairwell. Her small hand was cold against his skin, but her grip was certain. Against all logic, Richard followed. They descended several flights before exiting into a service corridor. The girl navigated the hotel's back passageways with uncanny familiarity, eventually leading them to the mezzanine level, where hotel guests mingled in the lounge bar, unaware of the drama unfolding above. "We should be safe here," she said, sliding into a booth partially concealed by a large potted palm. "You should call the police now." Richard studied her as he pulled out his phone. Her dark eyes held his gaze with unsettling steadiness. "Who are you?" he asked. "How did you know someone was in my room?" "My name is Lucy," she answered simply. "Lucy Winters. And I just knew." She reached for an abandoned mug of hot chocolate. On their table, wrapping her small hands around it as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and took a sip. The police arrived within minutes, their response accelerated by Richard's status. As officers swept the building, Detective Mark Hawkins, a veteran with the NYPD, interviewed Richard in a private conference room. "The security footage is completely blank for the past hour," Hawkins explained, showing Richard the empty screens on his tablet. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. When Richard explained how Lucy had warned him, Hawkins frowned. "And where is this girl now?" Richard glanced across the room where Lucy sat, quietly drawing on hotel stationery, with a pen she'd found. Despite the chaos around her, officers coming and going, radios crackling with updates, she remained oddly composed, occasionally looking up to meet Richard's gaze with those knowing eyes. "She hasn't told me how she knew," Richard admitted. But she saved me from whatever was waiting in that room. The initial sweep confirmed Lucy's warning. 3 men had been hiding in Richard's suite, professional equipment suggesting a carefully planned operation. Yet strangely, the hotel's safe remained untouched, his laptop undisturbed. Nothing had been stolen. This wasn't a robbery, Hawkins concluded, flipping through his notes. They were waiting specifically for you, Mr. Calloway. As the hours passed and the investigation continued, Richard found himself increasingly drawn to the mysterious girl. While the officers processed the scene, he sat beside her, watching as she meticulously filled page after page with drawings. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight, Lucy?" he asked gently. "Someone I can call for you?" "I live with my grandmother," she replied without looking up from her drawing. "But you shouldn't go back to your apartment either. They'll be looking for you there too." A chill ran through Richard at her words. How could you possibly know that? Lucy finally looked up, her expression serious beyond her years. "The same way I knew they were in your hotel room. I see things sometimes, before they happen." Under normal circumstances, Richard would have dismissed such claims immediately. He'd built his empire on rational decisions and verifiable facts, not mystical premonitions. Yet the evidence of her first warning was impossible to ignore. "Your grandmother must be worried about you," he said instead. "She knows I'm safe," Lucy answered cryptically, returning to her drawing. After confirming with Detective Hawkins that Richard's Manhattan apartment should indeed be avoided until they completed their investigation, Richard made arrangements at another hotel across town, a smaller, less conspicuous establishment where he occasionally stayed when seeking privacy. "I can't let you go back alone," he told Lucy. "Not after what you've done for me." "Let me call your grandmother, explain what happened, and arrange for you both to stay somewhere safe tonight." Lucy provided her grandmother's number with surprising willingness. The conversation with Martha Winters was brief and strange. The elderly woman seemed neither surprised nor particularly concerned about her granddaughter's whereabouts. She agreed to meet them the following day, but declined Richard's offer of accommodation, saying only that Lucy knows what she's doing. In the taxi to the new hotel, Lucy's attention remained fixed on her drawing pad. Richard caught glimpses of architectural details, fragments of faces, scenes he couldn't quite place. When they arrived at their destination, a boutique hotel in the West Village, she tucked the pad under her arm and followed him inside without hesitation. The suite Richard secured had 2 separate bedrooms. After ordering room service, Lucy requested pancakes despite the late hour. They settled in the living area, the city lights glittering beyond the windows. "Lucy," Richard began carefully, "I need to understand how you knew what was happening tonight." She set aside her fork and met his gaze directly. "I've always seen things. Grandmother says it runs in our family." She spoke matter-of-factly, as though discussing something as ordinary as having blue eyes or being left-handed. "And what else do you see?" he asked, unable to hide his skepticism despite the night's evidence. Without answering, Lucy retrieved her drawing pad and flipped to a page she'd been working on earlier. She turned it toward Richard, and his blood ran cold. The face staring back at him from the paper was unmistakable, a man he hadn't seen in over 20 years. The sharp features, the calculating eyes, the slight sneer that always seemed to play at the corners of his mouth. Victor Mitchell, his former business partner, rendered with unsettling accuracy by the hands of a child who couldn't possibly have known him. "Who is he?" Lucy asked, though something in her eyes suggested she already knew the answer. Richard set the drawing down with trembling fingers. "Someone from my past," he managed. "Someone I thought was long gone." He studied Lucy's face, searching for any sign that this was some elaborate trick or manipulation. "How could you possibly draw him?" Lucy's answer was simple and devastating. "Because he's the one who wants to hurt you." Sleep eluded Richard that night. He sat in the armchair by the window, watching the Manhattan skyline as his mind raced through possibilities. The drawing of Victor Mitchell lay on the coffee table, an impossible artifact created by a child who should have no knowledge of his past. Occasionally, he glanced toward the closed door of Lucy's bedroom, wondering if she was another piece in whatever game Victor was playing. By morning, Richard had reached no conclusions, only more questions. He ordered breakfast through room service and was surprised to find Lucy already awake when it arrived, sitting cross-legged on the sofa with her drawing pad open before her. "Good morning," he offered, pouring himself coffee from the carafe. "Did you sleep well?" Lucy nodded, adding details to whatever she was sketching. "Your friend is staying at the Windsor Hotel on 58th Street, room 1217. Richard nearly dropped his cup. "What friend?" "The man from my drawing. The one who wants to find you." She spoke without looking up, her pencil moving in deliberate strokes across the paper. Richard set his coffee down and approached her slowly. "Lucy, I need you to tell me exactly how you know these things." She finally looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. "I told you I see things. Sometimes in dreams, sometimes when I'm awake. Grandmother says it's a gift, but it doesn't always feel that way." Before Richard could press further, his phone rang. Detective Hawkins was calling with an update. "We've completed our initial investigation, Mr. Calloway," the detective reported. "The men who broke into your suite were professionals, but they left in a hurry when you didn't show. We found some interesting equipment, not just for a kidnapping, but for extraction. They were planning to take you somewhere." "Any leads on who hired them?" Richard asked, watching Lucy as she continued drawing, seemingly oblivious to his conversation. "Nothing concrete yet, but we're working on it. In the meantime, I'd advise staying somewhere secure. We've arranged for additional security at your residence and office." After ending the call, Richard sat beside Lucy. "Your grandmother is coming today?" Lucy nodded. "She'll be here after lunch. She moves slowly these days." "And your parents?" Richard ventured carefully. "Should we contact them too?" A shadow passed over Lucy's face. "My mum disappeared 3 years ago. I never knew my dad." Richard felt a pang of sympathy for the child. Perhaps her strange behavior and claims of visions were a result of trauma. Yet that didn't explain how she knew about Victor, or the men waiting in his hotel room. "I'm sorry to hear that, Lucy. It must be difficult living without your mother." She shrugged with forced nonchalance. "Grandmother takes care of me, but she's getting older. Sometimes I take care of her too." Their conversation was interrupted by another call, this time from Richard's head of security, Frank Sullivan. "We've implemented the additional measures Detective Hawkins requested," Frank reported, "but there's something else you should know. We've detected unusual activity in some of the company's dormant accounts, ones that haven't been accessed in years." "What kind of activity?" Richard asked, moving away from Lucy toward the window. "Someone's been running searches on old records, specifically from the early days of Calloway Enterprises. The searches were sophisticated, bypassing most of our security protocols." After ending the call, Richard turned to find Lucy standing beside him, holding out her drawing pad. "I finished another one," she said simply. The new sketch showed a building Richard hadn't seen in decades, the first office of Calloway Enterprises, a converted warehouse in Brooklyn where he and Victor had launched their company 25 years ago. The details were perfect, down to the faded sign above the door and the pattern of broken windows on the upper floor. "Lucy," Richard said carefully, "how could you possibly know what this building looks like?" "I don't know it," she replied. "I just draw what I see." The arrival of Martha Winters that afternoon brought no clarity to the situation. The elderly woman appeared remarkably unconcerned about her granddaughter's involvement in the previous night's events. With her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her posture still proud despite her advanced years, Martha carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen too much to be easily surprised. "Lucy has always had her ways," she explained to Richard as they sat in the hotel suite's living room, Lucy having retreated to the bedroom to continue drawing. "It started when she was very young, just after her mother left. At first I thought it was her imagination, but then the things she drew started coming true." "And you've never sought help for this?" Richard asked, trying to keep the judgment from his voice. Martha smiled knowingly. "What kind of help would you suggest, Mr. Calloway? Doctors who would medicate her? therapists who would tell her it's just fantasy. I've protected her the only way I know how, by believing her. When Richard showed Martha the drawing of Victor Mitchell, her reaction was subtle but unmistakable, a slight tensing around her eyes, quickly masked. "You recognize him," Richard stated, rather than asked. "I've never met the man," Martha replied, carefully. "But Lucy has drawn him before." The conversation was interrupted when Lucy emerged from the bedroom with a new drawing in hand. This one depicted the interior of Richard's private office at Callaway Tower, a space few people had ever entered. The details were impeccable. His custom desk, the rare first-edition books on the shelves, even the small safe concealed behind a painting of the Manhattan skyline. "I've never been to your office," Lucy said, answering his unspoken question. "But it's important. There's something there you need to find." Richard studied the drawing, noticing that Lucy had placed particular emphasis on the painting concealing his safe. "What am I looking for?" "I don't know exactly," she admitted, "but it has something to do with a woman named Eleanor." The name hit Richard like a physical blow. Eleanor Hayes, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in over 2 decades, his first love, his greatest regret. How could this child possibly know about Eleanor? Martha watched this exchange with sharp eyes. "Perhaps it's time you told us about your connection to the man in the drawing, Mr. Callaway, and to this Eleanor person." Richard hesitated, the memories he'd kept locked away for so long struggling to surface. "Victor Mitchell was my business partner when I founded Callaway Enterprises. We started with nothing but an idea and a small loan. For the first few years, we were inseparable, building the company together, sharing the same vision. At least, I thought we were." He paused, the weight of the past pressing down on him. "Eleanor Hayes was someone very special to me. We were engaged to be married. But things fell apart when I was sent to oversee our expansion in Europe. The distance strained our relationship, and eventually, our communication just stopped. I assumed she'd moved on with her life. I tried to do the same." "What happened with your partner?" Martha prompted when Richard fell silent. "Victor betrayed me. He tried to sell proprietary technology to our competitors. When I discovered what he was doing, I confronted him and dissolved our partnership. He left the country afterward. Last I heard, he was in South America somewhere." Richard looked at Lucy's drawing again. "At least that's what I believed until now." Lucy had been listening intently. The woman, Eleanor, she had brown hair that she wore long, and green eyes. She liked to paint watercolors. Richard stared at her in disbelief. "How could you possibly know that?" Instead of answering, Lucy turned to a fresh page in her sketchbook and began drawing with quick, sure strokes. Within minutes, Eleanor's face emerged on the paper, not as the young woman Richard had known, but older, her once vibrant features softened by time. Yet the essence of her was captured perfectly. The slight tilt of her head, the gentle curve of her smile. "She's still here," Lucy said, tapping the completed portrait, "in New York, but she's not well." Martha placed a steadying hand on her granddaughter's shoulder. "Lucy, how do you know these things about Mr. Callaway's past?" "The drawings show me," Lucy replied simply. "They always have. Sometimes I see people who need help and I have to find them." Richard struggled to process what was happening. The logical part of his mind sought rational explanations. Perhaps Lucy had researched him, or someone had coached her. Yet the precision of her knowledge went beyond what could be found through research. "I think," Martha said carefully, "that you and Lucy were meant to find each other, Mr. Callaway, and I think you need to see what's in that safe." Richard made arrangements for heightened security at his office, then contacted his private driver. Whatever game was being played, he needed answers, and Lucy's drawing pointed to his safe as the place to start. As they prepared to leave the hotel, Lucy tugged on Richard's sleeve. "Be careful," she warned, her eyes serious. "He's watching. He knows I found you." "Victor?" Lucy nodded solemnly. "He's been looking for you for a long time, and he's very angry." The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Richard's car navigated the Manhattan traffic. Beside him, Lucy sat quietly, her drawing pad clutched to her chest. In the front passenger seat, Frank Sullivan maintained a vigilant watch on their surroundings. "We'll stop at my office first," Richard decided. "Then we need to find somewhere more secure to stay tonight." Lucy nodded, her attention drawn to the passing buildings. "The woman in my drawing, Eleanor, she's at Riverside Meadows Care Center. We should go there after your office." Richard felt his heart constrict. "How do you know where she is?" Lucy turned those unsettlingly wise eyes toward him. "Because that's where she's been waiting for you all this time." Callaway Tower dominated the Manhattan skyline, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun. Richard's private elevator whisked them directly to the executive floor, bypassing the usual security checkpoints. Lucy remained unusually quiet. During the ascent, her eyes fixed on the changing floor numbers. "Are you all right?" Richard asked as the elevator slowed to a stop. Lucy nodded, clutching her drawing pad tighter. "It feels strange being here. Like I've been here before, but I know I haven't." Frank Sullivan exited first, scanning the corridor before motioning them forward. Richard's executive, assistant Marion, looked up in surprise as they entered the outer office. "Mr. Callaway, we weren't expecting you today." Her eyes darted curiously to Lucy and Martha. "Just need to retrieve something from my office, Marion," Richard explained. "Please hold all calls." The familiar confines of his private office felt suddenly foreign with Lucy present. She moved around the space with an eerie familiarity, walking directly to the painting that concealed his safe. Martha settled into one of the leather guest chairs, watching her granddaughter with knowing eyes. "It's exactly like my drawing," Lucy murmured, studying the cityscape painting. Richard moved the artwork aside, revealing the wall safe behind. "Tess, you should turn around while I enter the combination," he suggested. Lucy obediently turned away but said, "It's 5-17-7-3, Eleanor's birthday." Richard froze, his fingers hovering over the keypad. He had indeed used Eleanor's birthday as his combination, a private tribute to the woman he'd lost, chosen at a time when the wound of their separation was still fresh. No one else knew this. Not his security team, not his assistant, no one. With slightly trembling hands, he entered the familiar sequence. The safe clicked open, revealing its contents: legal documents, emergency cash, a velvet jewelry box containing his mother's heirloom, pieces, and a small wooden case he hadn't opened in years. Lucy turned back around as if sensing the safe was open. "The wooden box," she said without hesitation. "That's what we need." Richard removed the mahogany case, its surface smooth from years of handling. Inside, preserved in protective sleeves, were the few mementos he'd kept from his relationship with Eleanor, a faded photograph of them in Central Park, the receipt from their first dinner date, a small watercolor she'd painted for him, and several letters, the last communication they'd shared before their relationship inexplicably collapsed. Lucy's hand hovered over the contents, not touching but sensing. "There should be more letters," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Many more." "There were more," Richard confirmed, the old pain resurfacing. "We wrote to each other every week when I was in Europe. Then her letters just stopped coming. Eventually mine were returned unopened." Martha leaned forward in her chair. "Mr. Callaway, when exactly did this happen?" 23 years ago, he answered, calculating quickly. "I was in London for nearly a year, establishing our European headquarters." Martha and Lucy exchanged a significant look. "Lucy's mother, Sarah, was adopted 22 years ago," Martha said carefully. "She was just a baby when she came to us." Richard struggled to see the connection. "I'm not sure I understand the relevance." "Sarah was adopted through Bright, Future's adoption agency," Martha continued, "an agency that was later shut down for unethical practices. The paperwork we received was minimal at best." Lucy had been flipping through her drawing pad while they spoke. She turned it toward Richard, showing him a sketch of a young woman with familiar features, a face that echoed Eleanor's, yet was distinctly different. "This is my mother," Lucy explained. "I drew this from a photograph grandmother keeps. She disappeared 3 years ago." Richard studied the drawing, a strange suspicion forming in his mind. "And you never knew who her biological parents were?" Martha shook her head. The adoption was closed. All we knew was that her mother was young and unable to care for her. The implications hung in the air between them. Richard carefully returned the other wooden box to the safe, securing it before turning to Frank Sullivan, who had maintained a discreet position by the door. "Frank, I need you to look into something," Richard instructed. "The Bright Futures Adoption Agency, operational approximately 22 years ago. And I need a full background check on Sarah Winters, daughter of Martha Winters." Frank nodded, making notes on his phone. "Anything else, sir?" "Yes. See what you can find on Eleanor Hayes's current situation, specifically any connection to Riverside Meadows Care Center." As Frank stepped outside to begin his inquiries, Richard turned back to Martha and Lucy. "If what I'm thinking is even remotely possible, that my mother might be connected to your Eleanor?" Martha finished for him. "I've been wondering the same thing since Lucy first drew that woman's face." Lucy had moved to the window, gazing out at the city spread below them. "We need to go to Riverside Meadows," she said with quiet certainty. "She's waiting." The drive to the care facility in Westchester County took nearly an hour through heavy traffic. Lucy spent most of the journey drawing, her pencil moving in swift, sure strokes across the paper. Occasionally she would tear out a completed sketch and hand it to Richard without comment, fragments of a puzzle he couldn't yet assemble. One drawing showed the old Callaway Enterprises warehouse, but with a small office in the corner circled repeatedly. Another depicted Victor Mitchell, standing before a wall covered in photographs and documents, a conspiracy board of sorts, with Richard's face at the center. The most disturbing showed a hospital room with a woman lying in bed, her face matching the older Eleanor that Lucy had drawn earlier. Riverside Meadows Care Center was set on expansive grounds, its red brick buildings partially hidden by mature oak trees. The main reception area was bright and welcoming, with fresh flowers and comfortable seating arranged to create a home-like atmosphere. Richard approached the reception desk, Lucy and Martha following close behind. "I'm here to see Eleanor Hayes," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. The receptionist typed the name into her computer. "Are you family, sir?" Richard hesitated. "I'm an old friend. I only recently learned she was here." The woman's expression softened. "Ms. Hayes is in our memory care unit. I'll need to check if she's accepting visitors today. Some days are better than others for our residents there." While they waited, Lucy wandered to a bulletin board displaying photographs of residents engaged in various activities. She pointed to one showing a gardening class. In the background, partially obscured by another resident, was a woman with silver-streaked brown hair, her face turned away from the camera. "That's her," Lucy whispered. "That's Eleanor." A nurse approached them, introducing herself as Diane Morgan. "I understand you're here to see Eleanor Hayes. I'm her primary care nurse." Richard extended his hand. "Richard Callaway. We were close many years ago." Nurse. Morgan's expression registered recognition at his name. "Mr. Callaway, that's interesting. Eleanor sometimes mentions a Richard when she's having one of her good days." "Good days?" Richard echoed. "Eleanor has early-onset Alzheimer's," Nurse Morgan explained gently. "She was diagnosed 5 years ago. Some days she's quite lucid. Others—" She shook her head. "Today has been reasonably good. She might recognize you, but please don't be upset if she doesn't." The memory care unit was secured by keypad entry. As they followed Nurse Morgan through the quiet corridors, Richard felt a growing sense of trepidation. What would he say to Eleanor after all these years? How much would she remember of their past, of what had gone wrong between them? They paused outside a door decorated with a watercolor painting of a garden. "Eleanor still paints when she can," Nurse Morgan explained. "It's one of the activities that seems to ground her even on difficult days." She knocked gently before opening the door. "Eleanor, you have visitors today." The woman sitting by the window turned slowly at the sound of Nurse Morgan's voice. Though time had silvered her hair and softened her features, Richard would have known Eleanor anywhere. Her green eyes, still bright, despite the confusion that sometimes clouded them, widened as they fell on Richard. Richard! Her voice was hesitant, as if she couldn't quite trust what she was seeing. Is it really you? Richard moved forward, his heart hammering in his chest. Yes, Eleanor, it's me. She studied his face with intense concentration, reaching up to touch his cheek with trembling fingers. I've dreamed of you so many times. How can I know this isn't another dream? It's not a dream, he assured her, gently taking her hand in his. I'm really here. Eleanor's gaze shifted to Lucy and Martha, standing quietly near the door. And who are your friends? Before Richard could answer, Lucy stepped forward, offering Eleanor one of her drawings, the portrait she had created of Eleanor as a young woman. Eleanor gasped softly as she took the paper. This is Gimme, from before. She looked up at Lucy with wonder. How did you know? How could you know what I looked like then? Lucy shrugged, a gesture that seemed both childlike and ancient. I just draw what I see. Eleanor's attention returned to Richard, a flash of clarity sharpening her gaze. You never came back. I waited and waited, but you never came back. I tried, Eleanor, Richard said, the pain of those old wounds suddenly fresh. I wrote to you every week, but my letters were returned. When I finally came back to New York, they told me you'd moved away with someone else. Confusion clouded Eleanor's expression. No, that's not right. I wrote to you too, for months. Victor said you were too busy with your new European clients to respond. He said you'd moved on, that I should do the same. Victor, Richard's voice hardened. Victor Mitchell told you these things? Eleanor nodded slowly. He was kind to me after you left. He brought me news of you. Delivered my letters. At least he said he did. Her brow furrowed in concentration. Then he told me you were engaged to someone in London, some banker's daughter. He showed me the announcement from a London newspaper. The pieces were falling into place, a terrible pattern emerging. Eleanor, there was never anyone else. Not in London, not anywhere. I came back to New York for you, but Victor told me you'd left the city with a new partner. Nurse Morgan, who had been standing discreetly by the door, stepped forward. I think this might be enough for today. Eleanor tires easily, and too much excitement isn't good for her. Eleanor clutched Richard's hand more tightly. Don't go. Not again. There's so much I need to tell you, so much you don't know. I'll come back tomorrow, Richard promised. We have time now. As they prepared to leave, Lucy approached Eleanor once more, offering her the drawing pad and a pencil. Maybe you could draw something for me? For when we come back? Eleanor accepted the pad with a grateful smile. I'd like that. Drawing helps me remember. In the hallway outside, Nurse Morgan pulled Richard aside. Mr. Calloway, there's something you should know. Eleanor rarely receives visitors except for her social worker. She's mentioned a daughter occasionally, but in her confusion, it's hard to know what's real and what isn't. A daughter, Richard repeated, his suspicions growing stronger. Did she ever mention a name? Sarah, Nurse Morgan confirmed. She talks about her Sarah on her good days. But as far as we know from her records, Eleanor never had children. Her social worker suggested it might be a confabulation, a false memory created to fill gaps in her recollection. As they left the care facility, Frank Sullivan called with preliminary findings. Sir, I've confirmed that Eleanor Hayes has been at Riverside Meadows for 3 years. Before that, she lived in a small apartment in Queens. She worked as an art teacher until her condition made it impossible to continue. And Sarah Winters? Richard prompted. That's where things get interesting, Frank replied. Sarah Winters was indeed adopted through Bright Futures Agency in 2003. The agency was shut down in 2007 for falsifying records and illegal adoptions. Many of their records were destroyed, but I'm working on tracking down former employees who might have information. And her disappearance? Reported missing 3 years ago, last seen leaving her workplace, a bookstore in Brooklyn. The case is still technically open, but there's been no activity for over 2 years. As the car pulled away from Riverside Meadows, Lucy stared back at the building, her expression solemn. We're running out of time, she said quietly. He knows. We've found her. Night had fallen by the time they returned to Manhattan. Richard arranged for a private security detail at his Tribeca loft, a property few people knew he owned. As they settled into the spacious apartment, the city lights glittering beyond the windows, Richard's mind raced with the implications of everything they'd learned. Martha sat at the kitchen island, nursing a cup of tea, while Lucy explored the apartment, her fingers trailing over Richard's collection of art and rare books with quiet appreciation. "She's always been drawn to beautiful things," Martha observed, watching her granddaughter. Sarah was the same way. Richard joined Martha at the island, pouring himself a much-needed whiskey. "Mrs. Winters, I need to ask you something directly. Do you believe there's a connection between your daughter's disappearance and what's happening now?" Martha's weathered hands tightened around her teacup. "I've been asking myself the same question since Lucy first drew that man's face, the one you called Victor Mitchell. Sarah started acting strangely a few weeks before she disappeared. She said she felt like someone was watching her. I thought it was anxiety. She'd struggled with it before, but now—" "Did she ever mention anything about her biological parents? Any interest in finding them?" "She looked into it when she was younger," Martha said. "The adoption agency stonewalled her. Eventually she seemed to make peace with not knowing." She paused, considering. "But about a month before she disappeared, she mentioned having found something important about her past. She was excited but secretive, said she needed to verify some information before she could share it." Lucy returned to the kitchen, carrying one of her drawings. It showed a small bookstore with a distinctive green awning. "This is where my mum worked," she explained, placing it on the counter. "Cornerstone Books in Brooklyn. She was the manager." Richard studied the drawing, recognition dawning. "I know this place. It's not far from our first office building, the warehouse I showed you earlier." Lucy nodded. "That's why she took the job there. She could see the old building from the store's window." Martha looked startled. "Lucy, how could you know that? Your mother never told us why she chose that particular bookstore." "She wrote it in her journal," Lucy explained. "I found it after she disappeared. She said the building called to her somehow, like it was important to her story." Richard exchanged a significant look with Martha. "The warehouse has been abandoned for years, but Callaway Enterprises still owns the property. We should go there tomorrow. See if there's anything that might help us understand what's happening." Frank Sullivan called again as they were finishing a late dinner. "Sir, I've located a former employee of Bright Futures, Angela Mercer. She worked as an administrative assistant there from 2000 to 2006. She's agreed to meet with you tomorrow morning." "Excellent work, Frank. Arrange the meeting for 9 a.m. Richard ended the call and turned to Martha and Lucy. "We may have our first real lead." Later that night, after Martha had retired to the guest bedroom, Richard found Lucy sitting in the darkened living room, staring out at the city. Her drawing pad lay open beside her, filled with new sketches, fragmented images that seemed to be pieces of a larger story. "Shouldn't you be asleep?" he asked gently, sitting beside her. "I can't sleep when the pictures keep coming," she replied, her voice small in the darkness. "Sometimes they're too loud in my head." Richard studied her profile, illuminated by the city lights. Despite her extraordinary abilities, she was still just a child, one who had endured the trauma of her mother's disappearance and now carried the weight of visions she couldn't fully control. "Lucy, when did these drawings start? These visions?" She was quiet for a long moment. "After Mom disappeared. At first I just drew her, trying to see where she was, but then I started seeing other things. Other people." She turned to face him. "I saw you a year ago, in a dream. You were standing on a rooftop, looking out at the city, and you were so sad, so alone." The description matched a moment Richard remembered vividly, the night of Callaway Enterprises' 20th anniversary gala. He'd escaped to the rooftop terrace, overwhelmed by the hollowness of his achievement. No one to share it with, no one who truly knew him. "When I saw you at the hotel," Lucy continued, "I knew it was time, that I was supposed to find you. To warn me about the men in my room?" Lucy shook her head. "That was just the beginning. I'm supposed to help you find the truth. About Eleanor, about my mother, about what Victor Mitchell did to all of you." The meeting with Angela Mercer took place at a quiet cafe in the Upper West Side. Frank Sullivan positioned himself at a nearby table, maintaining discreet surveillance, while Richard, Martha, and Lucy sat in a corner booth, awaiting the former, adoption agency employee. Angela Mercer arrived precisely at 9 a.m., a nervous woman in her 50s with prematurely grey hair and anxious eyes that darted around the cafe as if expecting trouble. She slid into the booth opposite Richard, her hands fidgeting with her purse. "Thank you for meeting with us, Ms. Mercer," Richard began. "I understand this might be difficult for you." "You don't know what you're getting into," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Bright Futures wasn't just bending rules, they were breaking laws, destroying lives. I've spent years trying to forget what happened there." Martha leaned forward. "My daughter Sarah was adopted through your agency in 2003. We need to know where she really came from." Angela's eyes widened slightly as they fell on Lucy. "This is her daughter? The resemblance is—" She trailed off, seeming to reconsider her words. "We believe Sarah may have been Eleanor Hayes's biological daughter," Richard said directly, "and potentially my daughter as well." Angela's sharp intake of breath confirmed they were on the right track. "The Hayes case," she murmured. "I remember it. It was one of the ones that always bothered me." "Please," Martha urged, "we need to know the truth." Angela glanced around once more before extracting a small notebook from her purse. "I kept records," she admitted. "Not of everything, but of the cases that seemed wrong, the ones where something didn't add up." She flipped through the pages until she found what she was looking for. Eleanor Hayes, age 24, surrendered infant, daughter in February 2003. The surrender documents were processed by Victor Mitchell, acting as the birth mother's representative. Richard felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath him. Victor handled the adoption. That's impossible. He had no legal authority. "That's what made this case stand out," Angela continued. "Mr. Mitchell presented power of attorney documents, showing he was authorized to act on Ms. Hayes's behalf. He claimed she was suffering from severe postpartum depression and had been hospitalized. Everything seemed in order on paper, but—" She hesitated. "But what?" Richard prompted. "I never saw Ms. Hayes, never spoke to her. That was unusual. We typically required at least one counseling session with the birth mother before proceeding with adoption. When I raised concerns with my supervisor, I was told to process the paperwork and not ask questions." Martha's hand had found Lucy's, holding it tightly. "And the baby went to us." Angela nodded. "The adoption was expedited. Normally there would be a waiting period, a matching process with prospective parents. But Mr. Mitchell specifically requested your family. He said Ms. Hayes had chosen you personally." "Did he say why?" Richard asked. "Only that you lived far from New York. You were in Minnesota at the time, correct? And that you had no connections to anyone who might know Ms. Hayes or her circumstances." The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty and calculation. Victor had stolen Eleanor's child, their child, and placed her with a family far removed from their social circles, ensuring the secret would remain buried. "There's something else," Angela said, lowering her voice further. A few months after the adoption was finalized, I received a call from a woman claiming to be Eleanor Hayes. She was frantic, saying she'd never surrendered her baby, that someone had taken her child while she was hospitalized. I reported it to my supervisor, but he dismissed it as a psychotic episode, said Ms. Hayes had a history of mental instability. "That was a lie," Richard said, his voice hard with suppressed anger. "Eleanor has never had psychological issues. She was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 5 years ago, but before that she was completely sound." Angela closed her notebook. "Mr. Calloway, if what you're suggesting is true, if Mr. Mitchell falsified surrender documents and essentially stole Ms. Hayes's baby, then we're talking about serious criminal activity. The statute of limitations may have expired on some charges, but not all." Richard nodded grimly. "I intend to see justice done, Ms. Mercer, for Eleanor, for Sarah, and for Lucy." As they left the cafe, Lucy tugged at Richard's sleeve. "We need to go to the warehouse now," she insisted. "There's something there we need to find." The old Calloway Enterprises warehouse stood in a section of Brooklyn that had yet to be fully gentrified, despite the steady march of development throughout the borough. The building's red brick exterior was weathered, windows boarded up, the faded company logo still visible above the main entrance. Frank Sullivan disabled the security system, allowing them entry through a side door. The interior was dusty and abandoned, filled with the ghosts of Richard's early ambitions. Old office furniture sat shrouded in dust covers, defunct computers, and early prototypes still occupied shelves along the walls. Lucy moved through the space with purpose, heading directly for the corner office that had featured in one of her drawings. "This was your office," she said to Richard, "and that one was Victor's." She pointed to a smaller office across the open workspace. "That's right," Richard confirmed, surprised by her certainty. "How did you know?" Instead of answering, Lucy entered Victor's former office, moving to a specific spot on the wall. "There's something behind here," she said, tapping the paneling. "Something hidden." Frank Sullivan examined the wall, finding a slight seam in the wood paneling. With careful pressure, a hidden compartment popped open, revealing a small safe built into the wall. "I never knew this was here," Richard said, astonished. "This must have been installed without my knowledge." "Can you open it?" Lucy asked, her eyes wide with anticipation. Sullivan examined the safe. "It's an older model. I can probably bypass it, but it'll take some time." While Sullivan worked on the safe, Richard explored his old office, memories flooding back with each familiar detail. The view from the window, the spot where his first workstation had been set up, the corner where he and Victor had celebrated their first major contract, with cheap champagne and paper cups. "He was your friend once," Lucy said, joining him by the window, "before he became something else." Richard nodded. "We were like brothers. I never understood what changed him." "Jealousy," Lucy said simply. "He wanted what you had, not just success. He wanted to be you." Sullivan called from the other room. "Sir, I've got it open." The safe contained a single item, a metal box roughly the size of a thick book. Inside were dozens of letters, still in their original envelopes, the paper yellowed with age but otherwise perfectly preserved. With trembling hands, Richard examined them. They were the missing correspondence, letters from Eleanor to him, and his letters to her never delivered. The postmark spanned months, telling a story of increasing desperation as their communication seemingly went unanswered on both sides. "He intercepted our letters," Richard said, the full weight of Victor's betrayal crashing down on him. "All this time I thought she'd abandoned me, and she thought the same of me." Martha picked up one of the envelopes, examining the handwriting. "There's more here than just stolen love letters, Mr. Calloway. This was a systematic destruction of your relationship. The question is why?" Richard sat heavily in his old desk chair, the dust cloud rising around him unnoticed. "Victor always resented my leadership role in the company. He felt we should have been equal partners, but the truth was I had the vision, the drive. He was brilliant with technology, but he didn't understand people or markets the way I did." He looked up at Martha and Lucy. "But this goes beyond business rivalry. This was personal." Lucy had been sorting through the letters, organizing them by date. She paused, holding one envelope that was thicker than the others. "This one's different," she said, handing it to Richard. The letter inside was indeed different, written in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting, dated 23 years ago. It contained news that changed everything. "Dearest Richard, I've been trying to reach you for weeks with no response, and I can only hope this letter finds you. I have. Wonderful news that I can no longer keep to myself. We're going to have a baby. I'm nearly 3 months along now, and the doctor says everything looks perfect. Please call me as soon as you receive this. I miss you terribly and can't wait to build our family together. All my love, Eleanor." Richard read the words aloud, his voice breaking on the final sentence. Martha covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling in her eyes. He knew, Richard said, the pieces falling into place. Victor intercepted this letter, learned about the pregnancy, and saw an opportunity for the ultimate revenge. He didn't just want to destroy my relationship with Eleanor. He wanted to steal my child. Lucy had been unusually quiet, her attention focused on a blank wall in the corner of the office. Now she began to draw directly on the dusty surface with her finger, creating a timeline of events as they now understood them. Eleanor got pregnant, she narrated as she drew. She wrote to tell you, but Victor took the letter. When you didn't respond, she thought you'd abandoned her. Victor pretended to comfort her, while making sure neither of you could contact each other. Her finger moved across the wall, drawing a line to represent the passing months. When the baby was born, my mother, Victor convinced Eleanor that she couldn't care for a child alone. Maybe he drugged her or manipulated her medical records to make it seem like she was unstable. Then he arranged the adoption through Bright Futures, placing Sarah with the Winters family in Minnesota. Martha wiped tears from her cheeks. We had no idea. We were told Sarah's mother was a college student who couldn't care for a baby. We would never have taken her if we'd known she was essentially stolen. Richard carefully gathered the letters, placing them back in the metal box. None of this was your fault, Mrs. Winters. You gave Sarah a loving home. But now we need to find her and tell her the truth. Lucy's finger had continued its path across the wall. 3 years ago, Mom started researching her adoption. She must have found something that led her to suspect the truth. Maybe she discovered a connection to Callaway Enterprises. That's why she took the job at the bookstore near this building. And if she was getting close to the truth, Richard continued the thought, Victor would have seen her as a threat. He might have been monitoring the adoption records, watching for any inquiries. He took her, Lucy said with sudden certainty, her hand dropping from the wall. Victor has my mother. The revelation that Victor might be holding Sarah captive transformed their investigation from a search for truth into a rescue mission. Back at Richard's loft, Frank Sullivan coordinated with his security team to locate Victor Mitchell, while Richard contacted Detective Hawkins to share their discoveries. This is beyond my jurisdiction, Hawkins admitted after hearing Richard's account. But I can reach out to colleagues in the FBI. A cross-state kidnapping falls under federal authority. We need to move quickly and discreetly, Richard insisted. If Mitchell realizes we're onto him, Sarah could be in greater danger. Lucy sat at the dining table, drawing with feverish intensity. Page after page emerged from her pencil, detailed sketches of locations none of them recognized. A lakeside cabin nestled among pine trees, a boathouse with a distinctive weather vane, a long winding driveway bordered by stone walls. Martha watched her granddaughter with growing concern. She's never produced so many drawings at once. It's draining her. Richard brought Lucy a glass of water and a sandwich, setting them beside her. Lucy, you need to rest. You've been drawing for hours. Lucy didn't look up, her pencil moving in quick, precise strokes. I can see where she is now. It's becoming clearer. She finished the sketch she was working on, a detailed rendering of a mailbox with the number 1872 and the name Lakeside Retreat painted on its side. Frank Sullivan took the drawing, studying it. This could be a private property. The architecture and surroundings suggest somewhere in the Adirondacks or Catskills. I'll run a search for properties matching this description. While Sullivan worked, Richard returned to Riverside Meadows to visit Eleanor. He found her in the facility's sunroom, working on a watercolor painting. Despite the gravity of their situation, he paused in the doorway, struck by how the afternoon light illuminated her profile, a glimpse of the young woman he had loved so deeply. Richard, she said without turning, somehow sensing his presence. I was hoping you'd come back today. He moved to sit beside her, noting that her painting depicted the same lakeside cabin that had appeared in Lucy's drawings. That's beautiful, he said, gesturing to the watercolor. Is it someplace you've been? Eleanor tilted her head, studying her own work with a slight frown. I'm not sure. It feels familiar, but so many things are foggy now. She set down her brush. I had a good morning today. The doctors say that happens sometimes. Islands of clarity in the mist. What do you remember? Richard asked gently. I remember you, she said, reaching for his hand. I remember loving you, and I remember... Her voice faltered. I remember our baby, a little girl with your eyes. Richard squeezed her hand. Her name was Sarah. Eleanor's eyes brightened. Sarah, yes, that's right, my beautiful Sarah. Then her expression clouded. But they told me she didn't survive. There were complications, they said. I was too sedated to understand what was happening. Who told you this, Eleanor? Victor. He was there at the hospital. He handled everything while I was not well. After losing you, then the baby? She shook her head, frustrated by the gaps in her memory. I was in a treatment facility for a while. Depression, they called it. Richard struggled to maintain his composure. Eleanor, I believe Victor lied to both of us. Our daughter didn't die. He arranged for her adoption without your consent. Eleanor stared at him, her green eyes wide with shock and dawning comprehension. But why? Why would he do such a thing? Because he wanted to hurt me in the worst way possible. And he succeeded. He took everything that mattered most. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. Where is she, our Sarah? Richard hesitated, unsure how much to share about their suspicions regarding Sarah's disappearance. We're looking for her, but we've found her daughter, our granddaughter. Her name is Lucy, and she's extraordinary. Eleanor touched the painting of the lakeside cabin. I've been drawing this place for years. I never knew why it felt so important. Do you know where it is? Have you ever been there? She closed her eyes, concentrating. Victor had a vacation home. He took me there once after I lost the baby. Said I needed a change of scenery. It was by a lake in the mountains. Do you remember where? The name of the lake, perhaps? Eleanor shook her head. It was a private property, isolated. Beautiful but lonely. She picked up her brush again, adding details to the painting. A dock extending into the water, a small boat tied there. There was a boathouse with a weather vane. A fish, I think, or maybe a bird. Richard took a photo of the painting with his phone, sending it to Frank Sullivan with an urgent message. When he looked up, Eleanor was watching him with unusual clarity. You think she's there, don't you, our Sarah? It's possible, Richard admitted. We have reason to believe Victor was involved in her disappearance 3 years ago. Eleanor set down her painting materials with deliberate care. Then, I'm coming with you. Eleanor, I don't think she's my daughter, Richard. I lost 23 years with her because of Victor's lies. I won't lose a minute more. Back at the loft, Frank Sullivan had made a breakthrough. I've identified a property matching both Lucy's drawings and Ms. Hayes's description. It's registered to a shell company that I've traced back to Victor Mitchell, Lakeside Retreat on Eagle Lake in the Adirondacks. Richard studied the satellite images Sullivan had pulled up on his laptop. The property was indeed isolated, the nearest neighbor over a mile away, accessible only by a private road through dense forest. What's our approach? Richard asked. I've arranged for a helicopter, Sullivan replied. We can be there in under 2 hours. I have a team assembling now. Former Special Forces, highly discreet. Detective Hawkins had also made progress, securing FBI involvement, based on the evidence of kidnapping and fraud. They're sending a tactical team, but they're at least 4 hours out, he reported by phone. They've instructed us not to approach the property until they arrive. Richard exchanged looks with Sullivan. We'll reconnoiter only, he assured Hawkins, though both men knew his intentions went further. Against medical advice, Eleanor had been temporarily released from Riverside Meadows into Richard's care. She sat now with Martha and Lucy, the 3 generations of women bound by an extraordinary circumstance. Lucy had shown Eleanor her drawings, and Eleanor had shared her watercolors in return, their artistic visions of the same locations confirming what they already suspected. She looks like you, Eleanor said to Lucy, touching the girl's cheek. Gently. Those eyes, they're Richard's, but the rest is so much like Sarah. Mom used to say I got my stubbornness from her, Lucy replied with a small smile. But my imagination came from somewhere else. I guess now I know where. The plan took shape quickly. Sullivan's team would secure the perimeter of the lakeside property, while Richard, Sullivan, and 2 security specialists approached the main house. Martha would remain in the nearby town with Eleanor and Lucy, safely away from any potential confrontation. Lucy, however, had other ideas. I need to be there, she insisted, as they prepared to depart. I've seen it. I'm supposed to be there when you find her. Absolutely not, Richard said firmly. It's too dangerous. We don't know what we're walking into." Lucy turned to Eleanor, an unspoken communication passing between them. "Show him," she said simply. Eleanor retrieved her sketchbook, opening it to a page Richard hadn't seen before. The drawing showed Richard and Lucy standing before the lakeside cabin, a woman between them, her face obscured but her stance suggesting both fear and hope. "She won't come out for you alone," Eleanor explained. "She needs to see Lucy to believe it's safe." The compromise they reached allowed Lucy to remain in the helicopter with Martha, safely above the property, but close enough to be brought in if necessary. Eleanor, despite her desire to participate, recognized her limitations and agreed to wait at the command post Sullivan established in the nearby town of Eagle Bay. The approach to Lakeside Retreat began at dusk, the helicopter maintaining altitude to avoid detection. From above, the property matched Lucy's drawings perfectly. The main cabin nestled among tall pines, the boathouse with its distinctive weather vane, and the long driveway leading to the main road. Sullivan's team reported no visible security systems beyond basic surveillance cameras, which they quickly disabled. More concerning was the lack of movement or light from the main house, despite a vehicle being parked outside. "Proceed with extreme caution," Sullivan advised, as they landed in a clearing a quarter-mile from the property. "We don't know if Mitchell is on site." The team advanced through the woods with practiced silence, thermal imaging equipment scanning for heat signatures within the structures. The main cabin showed a single occupant in what appeared to be a bedroom on the upper level. The boathouse registered empty. "We'll approach from both sides," Sullivan directed. "Alpha team takes the rear. Bravo covers the front entrance. No one moves until both teams are in position." Richard, despite Sullivan's objections, insisted on being part of the entry team. "If Sarah is in there, a familiar face might prevent panic," he argued, though in truth, he knew his face would be anything but familiar to the daughter he'd never met. The cabin's front door was unlocked, a detail that immediately raised Sullivan's suspicions. They entered with practiced precision, clearing the main level room by room. The interior was sparsely furnished but well maintained, suggesting occasional rather than permanent occupation. A staircase led to the upper level where the heat signature had been detected. As they ascended, Richard's heart pounded so loudly he was certain everyone could hear it. 23 years of separation were about to end, one way or another. The bedroom door was closed, but not locked. Sullivan positioned his team, then gave Richard a nod. With a steadying breath, Richard turned the handle and pushed the door open. The woman seated by the window turned at their entrance, her expression shifting from fear to confusion. Though older than in the photographs Martha had shared, Sarah Winters was unmistakable. The same delicate features as Eleanor, the same determined set to her jaw. "Sarah Winters," Richard said, lowering the flashlight to avoid blinding her. She stood slowly, backing toward the window. "Who are you? How did you find me?" "My name is Richard Calloway. I'm here to help you. Your daughter Lucy is safe. She's with your adoptive mother." At the mention of Lucy, Sarah's composure cracked slightly. "Lucy, you've seen Lucy. Is she really okay?" "She's the one who led us to you," Richard explained, taking a cautious step forward. "She's been drawing pictures of this place for weeks." Sarah's eyes widened in understanding. "Her visions, they're getting stronger." She studied Richard more carefully now. "Did you say Calloway, as in Calloway Enterprises?" Richard nodded. "There's a great deal I need to explain to you, but first, we need to get you to safety. Is Victor Mitchell here?" Sarah shook her head. "He left yesterday, said he had business to attend to in the city." Her expression hardened. "He's been keeping me here for 3 years, claiming it's for my protection, that people are looking for me because of what I discovered." "And what was that exactly?" "That he stole me from my birth mother, that he fabricated adoption papers, and lied to everyone involved." Sarah's voice was steady despite the enormity of her words. "I found the original hospital records when I was researching my adoption. My birth mother's name was Eleanor Hayes, and my birth father—" She looked directly at Richard. "My birth father was listed as Richard Calloway." The helicopter returned to retrieve them, landing in a small clearing near the cabin. When Lucy saw Sarah emerging from the trees with Richard, She broke free from Martha's restraining hand and ran to her mother, colliding with her in a tearful embrace. "I knew I'd find you," Lucy sobbed, clinging to Sarah. "I kept drawing and drawing until the pictures showed me where you were." Sarah held her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her face. "My brilliant, magical girl. I never stopped thinking about you, not for a single day." As Martha joined the reunion, Richard stood apart, allowing the family their moment. The weight of 23 lost years pressed on him. All the birthdays missed, the milestones unseen, the father he had never been allowed to be. Sarah eventually approached him, Lucy's hand firmly in hers. "He told me you knew about me," she said, her voice holding an edge of accusation, "that you didn't want a child interfering with your career." "That was a lie," Richard replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I never knew Eleanor was pregnant. Victor intercepted her letters, made sure I never found out, just as he made her believe I had abandoned her." Sarah studied his face, looking for her own features reflected there. "And Eleanor? My birth mother? Is she?" "She's waiting to meet you," Richard said. "She never gave you up willingly, Sarah. Victor told her you had died during childbirth." The cruelty of Victor's deception left Sarah momentarily speechless. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with suppressed anger. "For 3 years, he's been telling me that he rescued me from people who wanted to exploit my connection to Callaway Enterprises, that he was the only one I could trust." She shook her head in disgust. "And I believed him because he had documents that seemed to prove everything he said." As they boarded the helicopter, Lucy took Richard's hand, a gesture so natural it made his heart constrict. "It's going to be okay now," she said with the simple certainty of a child. "We found each other. That's what matters." The helicopter lifted off, carrying them away from the lakeside prison and toward a reunion 23 years in the making. Below them, the cabin grew smaller, a diminishing reminder of the elaborate deception that had separated a family for far too long. In the town of Eagle Bay, Eleanor waited in a small inn that Sullivan's team had secured. When Sarah walked through the door, both women froze, taking in the mirror image of themselves separated by decades, but connected by blood and loss. "Sarah," Eleanor whispered, her hands reaching out uncertainly. "My Sarah." For a moment, it seemed Sarah might maintain her distance, the years of separation creating a chasm not easily bridged. Then Lucy gave her mother a gentle push forward, and Sarah moved into Eleanor's embrace. "I dreamed of this moment," Eleanor said through tears. "Even when they told me you were gone, I dreamed of holding you again." As the women embraced, Richard felt a small hand slip into his. Lucy looked up at him with those knowing eyes, Eleanor's shape, his color. "This is just the beginning," she said quietly. "There's still more to do." Richard squeezed her hand gently. "What do you mean?" Lucy's expression was solemn beyond her years. "Victor's coming back, and he won't let us go so easily." The return to Manhattan was somber yet hopeful, the helicopter cutting through the night sky as its passengers processed the enormity of their reconnection. Richard had arranged for everyone to stay at his Tribeca loft, where additional security personnel maintained a vigilant watch. The FBI had been updated on Sarah's recovery and Victor's imminent return to New York, setting in motion a coordinated effort to apprehend him. As dawn broke over the city, Richard found himself unable to sleep, standing at the loft's wall of windows with a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. The woman who emerged from the guest bedroom to join him was no longer a stranger, but still not quite family. Sarah, his daughter, the missing piece of his life for 23 years. "Lucy said I'd find you here," she said, wrapping her cardigan more tightly around herself. "She says you haven't slept." Richard offered a small smile. "That child doesn't miss much, does she?" "She never has," Sarah replied, moving to stand beside him at the window. "Even before the drawing started, she always seemed to know things she shouldn't. It used to frighten me a little." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the city come alive below them. "I need to ask you something," Sarah finally said. "About Victor. About why he did this to us." Richard set down his coffee cup. I've been asking myself the same question for days. Victor and I were more than business partners, we were like brothers, at least that's what I believed. When he was keeping me at the lake house, he would talk about you sometimes, Sarah said. There was always this intensity to his voice, like he was obsessed. He called you the golden boy, said everything always came easily to you while he had to fight for every scrap of recognition. That wasn't true, Richard sighed. Nothing came easily. I worked just as hard as he did. The difference was, I could see the bigger picture, could anticipate where technology was heading. Victor was brilliant with code, but he couldn't connect with people the way I could. It was more personal than business, though, Sarah pressed. The way he talked about you and Eleanor, there was something else there. Richard's expression darkened with realization. He was in love with her. Of course, I never saw it, because I was too caught up in my own feelings. But looking back, the signs were there. The way he always volunteered to deliver messages to her when I was traveling, how he'd remember details about her preferences that even I sometimes forgot. So when you left for London, he saw his opportunity, Richard finished. He could separate us, make each of us believe the other had moved on, and position himself as Eleanor's comforter. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the warmth of the room. But when she got pregnant with me, his plan fell apart. He couldn't be with her if she was carrying your child. So he created an elaborate lie, Richard said. Made Eleanor believe you had died, while arranging your adoption with a family far from New York. A soft voice interrupted their conversation. He's been watching all of us for years. They turned to find Lucy standing in the hallway, her drawing pad clutched to her chest. She approached them, opening the pad to reveal a detailed sketch of a wall covered in photographs, news clippings, and handwritten notes. A conspiracy board with Richard at its center, connected by lines to Eleanor, Sarah, and most recently, Lucy herself. This is what he has in his apartment, Lucy explained. I saw it in a dream last night. He calls it his project. That's how he thinks of all of you. Not as people, but as pieces in a game he's been playing for decades. The FBI arrived mid-morning to take formal statements from Sarah regarding her captivity. Special Agent Diana Chen, the lead investigator, listened with growing concern as Sarah recounted the past 3 years. He never physically harmed me, Sarah explained, but the psychological manipulation was constant. He controlled everything. When I could leave the cabin, who I could speak to on the rare occasions we went into town. He monitored all communications, claiming it was for my safety. And you never attempted to escape? Agent Chen asked. Twice, Sarah admitted. The first time he found me within hours. He had tracking software on the phone he'd given me. The second time I was more careful, but... She paused, gathering herself. He showed me pictures of my mother and Lucy, said he had people watching them, that they would suffer if I didn't cooperate. Agent Chen made notes as Sarah spoke. We believe Mr. Mitchell will return to New York today. Our surveillance team has him boarding a flight from Montreal this morning. We'll apprehend him when he lands. He'll have contingencies in place, Richard warned. Victor's always been meticulous about having backup plans. We're prepared for that, Agent Chen assured him. We've frozen his known accounts and placed alerts on his passports and credit cards. There's nowhere for him to run. Lucy, who had been quietly drawing in the corner during this discussion, suddenly looked up. He's not coming to the airport, she said with certainty. He knows something's wrong. He's driving instead. Agent Chen regarded the child with skepticism, but Richard had learned not to doubt Lucy's insights. How soon? He asked her. Lucy closed her eyes briefly. Tonight, after dark, he's coming here to this building. Despite Agent Chen's reluctance to base operational decisions on a child's hunches, the FBI established a discreet presence in Richard's building and the surrounding area. As evening approached, tension mounted in the loft. Eleanor and Martha had taken over the kitchen, cooking a meal that no one had much appetite for. Sarah alternated between helping them and checking on Lucy, who continued to draw with single-minded focus. Richard reviewed security footage with Frank Sullivan, tracking movement throughout the building. Nothing unusual so far, Sullivan reported. The FBI has agents in the lobby and service entrance. If Mitchell shows up, they'll intercept him. Unless he finds another way in, Richard mused. He's familiar with this building. He attended meetings here when we were still on speaking terms. We've secured all access points, Sullivan assured him. The only way in is through one of the monitored entrances. Lucy appeared at Richard's side, handing him her latest drawing. It showed the building's rooftop helipad, a feature rarely used but maintained for emergencies. In the sketch, a lone figure crouched by the access door, working on the security panel. He's coming from above, Lucy said quietly. He has the override codes from when you were partners. Sullivan immediately dispatched security personnel to the roof, while Richard contacted Agent Chen with the new information. The FBI team repositioned, establishing a perimeter around the rooftop access points. I want all of you to move to the panic room, Richard instructed the women. It's the most secure location in the loft. Eleanor shook her head. I've been running from Victor's influence for 23 years without even knowing it. I won't hide from him now. Mom, Sarah began, placing a hand on Eleanor's arm. No, Eleanor said firmly, a flash of her former strength shining through the fog of her condition. I need to face him. We all do. Lucy nodded in agreement. It has to be all of us. That's what I've been seeing. Richard wanted to protest, to insist on their safety, but something in Lucy's unwavering certainty gave him pause. At least stay, back, away from the entrance. Let the FBI handle the actual apprehension. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Agent Chen confirmed that her team was in position on the roof, maintaining radio silence as they waited. Richard and Sullivan monitored the security feeds from Richard's office, watching for any sign of movement. The first indication that Victor had arrived came not from the security system, but from Lucy. She suddenly stood from her seat at the dining table, her gaze fixed on the loft's main entrance. He's here, she whispered. Right now. Seconds later, the lights throughout the loft flickered and died, plunging them into darkness before the emergency generators kicked in, bathing everything in a dim, reddish glow. The security monitors in Richard's office went black, then rebooted to show static. He's cut the main power and looped the security feeds, Sullivan reported, already drawing his weapon. Classic distraction technique. Richard moved to position himself between the entrance and the women, but Eleanor stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on his arm. No, Richard. This isn't about protection anymore. This is about truth. At ease, subtle click of the front door lock. Disengaging seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence. The door swung open slowly, revealing a silhouette Richard would have recognized anywhere. Victor Mitchell, older but unmistakable, his lean frame and calculated movements unchanged by the passing decades. Richard, Victor said, his voice carrying the same smooth confidence it always had. I see you've assembled quite the welcoming committee. His gaze swept the room, taking in Eleanor, Sarah, and Lucy, before returning to Richard. Family reunion. It's over, Victor, Richard replied, struggling to contain the anger that threatened to overwhelm him. The FBI is on their way up now. You have nowhere to go. Victor stepped fully into the loft, closing the door behind him. Always so dramatic, Richard. I'm simply paying a visit to my old friend. Is that a crime now? Kidnapping is, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the slight trembling of her hands. So is fraud, identity theft, and falsifying adoption records. Victor turned his attention to her, his expression almost fond. Sarah, dear, I was concerned when you left our little retreat without a word. I've been looking everywhere for you. You've been lying to me for 3 years, Sarah replied. Just like you lied to my mother when you told her I had died. Just like you lied to Richard when you intercepted our letters. A flicker of surprise crossed Victor's face. You've been busy connecting dots, I see. He moved further into the room, seemingly unconcerned about the FBI agents who might appear at any moment. But you're missing crucial context. Everything I did was for the greater good. What possible good could come from tearing apart a family? Eleanor demanded, stepping forward. Her eyes were clear, her voice strong, a momentary reprieve from her condition that seemed almost miraculous. Victor's expression softened as he looked at her. Eleanor, You look well. I've thought of you often over the years. Not often enough. To tell me the truth, she replied. My daughter was alive, Victor. You let me believe she was gone, let me grieve for a child who was out there somewhere, growing up without me. I protected her, Victor insisted. Richard would have ruined her life, just as he would have ruined yours. His ambition always came first, before friendship, before love, before family. I saved you both from years of neglect and eventual abandonment. That wasn't your decision to make, Richard said, his voice tight with controlled fury. You played God with our lives because you couldn't stand that Eleanor chose me instead of you. She chose wrong, Victor snapped, his composure cracking for the first time. I would have given her everything. Instead, she wasted her love on someone who abandoned her for a business opportunity halfway around the world. You engineered that separation, Richard countered. You convinced the board that I was the only one who could handle the London expansion. You made sure I'd be gone for months. Throughout this exchange, Lucy had remained silent, watching Victor with an unnerving intensity. Now she stepped forward, moving past Sarah's restraining hand to stand directly before Victor. You've been having the dreams too, she said, looking up at him with those penetrating eyes. That's why you're really here, not just for them, but for me. Victor stared at the child, genuine unease crossing his features. What are you talking about? Lucy held up her drawing pad, showing a sketch of Victor sitting alone in a darkened room, head in his hands. You see things too, not like I do, but enough to know when something's changing. You felt it when I started drawing them, when I started putting the pieces together. For the first time, Victor seemed at a loss for words. His gaze darted between Lucy and the others, calculation visible in his eyes. The FBI will be here any minute, Richard said, moving closer to Lucy protectively. It's finished, Victor. Whatever game you've been playing for the past 23 years is over. Games have winners and losers, Richard, Victor replied, regaining his composure. And despite how this looks, I haven't lost yet. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket, but before he could reach whatever was concealed there, the loft's door burst open. Agent Chen and her team surged in, weapons drawn. Victor Mitchell, you're under arrest, Chen announced. Hands where we can see them. For a tense moment, it seemed Victor might resist. Then, with the same calculating smile he'd always worn when conceding a temporary setback in business, he raised his hands slowly. This is merely an intermission. Richard, he said as the agents moved to restrain him. Not the final curtain. As the FBI led Victor away, Lucy turned to Richard with a troubled expression. He's right, you know, it's not over yet. What do you mean? Richard asked, kneeling to her level. Lucy opened her drawing pad to a fresh page, revealing a sketch of a small metal object. He hid something at the lake house, something important. We need to find it before it's too late. Agent Chen returned after Victor had been taken into custody. We found these on him, she said, holding up a set of keys. One appears to be for a safety deposit box at First National Bank. We're securing a warrant now. Lucy studied the keys, then pointed to the smallest one. That's for a hidden compartment in the boathouse at the lake. There's a metal box under the floorboards. Chen raised an eyebrow but nodded. I'll have agents check it out. She turned to Richard. Mr. Calloway, we'll need all of you to come in tomorrow for formal statements. For tonight, I'm leaving 2 agents outside your door as a precaution. After the agents departed, an exhausted silence fell over the loft. The events of the past few days had left them all emotionally drained. Martha was the first to speak, her practical nature asserting itself. We all need rest, she said firmly. Tomorrow will be another long day. As the others prepared for bed, Richard found himself once again at the window, watching the city lights. Eleanor joined him, slipping her hand into his, with the easy familiarity of a connection that had never truly been broken. Do you think it's really over? She asked softly. Richard looked back at Sarah, helping Lucy arrange blankets on the sofa. Victor's part in it may be, but our story is just beginning again. Eleanor followed his gaze, a smile touching her lips despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes. We have a lot of time to make up for, Yes, Richard agreed, squeezing her hand gently. And this time, nothing will keep us apart. Lucy looked up from her blanket nest, catching Richard's eye with that knowing gaze that seemed to see right through him. She smiled, a child's simple smile, momentarily free from the weight of her extraordinary gifts. And Richard felt something settle in his chest. A certainty that despite Victor's ominous words, their newly reconnected family would face whatever came next together. The morning brought news from Agent Chen. The hidden compartment Lucy had described had indeed been found in the lake house, boathouse containing a metal case filled with documents, the original hospital records from Sarah's birth, Eleanor's medical files altered to suggest severe postpartum psychosis, and, most damning of all, correspondence between Victor and administrators at Bright Future's adoption agency, detailing the financial arrangements for their cooperation. It's more than enough to ensure he'll face significant prison time, Agent Chen explained. The evidence of long-term planning and deliberate fraud is overwhelming. Sarah sat at the dining table, examining copies of her original birth certificate, the first official document acknowledging Richard and Eleanor as her parents. All these years, she murmured, all the searching, the wondering about where I came from, and the answer was right here in New York all along. Martha placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. You needed to find your beginnings. I understand that. It doesn't change the fact that you'll always be my daughter too. Sarah covered Martha's hand with her own. You raised me, loved me, gave me everything a child could need. Nothing will ever change that. Richard watched this exchange with mixed emotions, gratitude for Martha's unwavering love for Sarah, yet a profound sadness for all the years he'd missed. Eleanor, seeming to sense his thoughts, leaned against him supportively. We can't reclaim the past, she said quietly, but we can build something new from here. Lucy, who had been unusually subdued all morning, looked up from her drawing pad. There's one more place we need to go, she announced. Something we need to see. The destination Lucy directed them to was in Brooklyn, a small, neglected cemetery tucked between newer developments. She led them through the quiet pathways with the confidence of someone who had visited many times before, though Richard knew she couldn't have. They stopped before a simple headstone, the inscription weathered but still legible. Baby girl Hayes, born and departed February 15, 2003. Forever in our hearts. Eleanor gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. This is your baby, Lucy confirmed. The one Victor told you had died. He bought this plot, had this stone placed here, to make sure you would believe the lie. Sarah knelt before the empty grave that bore her birth date, tracing the letters with trembling fingers. He thought of everything. Not quite everything, Richard said. He never accounted for Lucy for her gift. Eleanor placed a bouquet of wildflowers they had purchased en route against the stone. This chapter of our story is finally closed, she said. This grief was based on a lie, but it was real to me for 23 years. I need to say goodbye to it properly. They stood together in a moment of silence, not mourning a lost child, but acknowledging the years of separation that could never be reclaimed. When Lucy slipped her small hand into Richard's, he felt a surge of something powerful and healing. Not just the connection to this extraordinary child, but to the future they would build together as a family. As they turned to leave, Lucy paused, looking back at the headstone with a thoughtful expression. We should put something else here, she said, something that tells the truth. What would you suggest? Richard asked. Lucy considered for a moment. How about, here lies only a story that was never true. The real story continues elsewhere, with love. Eleanor smiled through her tears, drawing Lucy into an embrace. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. 6 months passed like the turning of seasons, each day bringing small healing moments to the reconnected family. Victor Mitchell's trial had proceeded swiftly, the evidence against him so overwhelming that even his high-priced legal team could only negotiate the terms of his incarceration rather than contest his guilt. He would spend the next 15 years in federal prison for kidnapping, fraud, and a host of other charges. Richard stood on the balcony of his newly purchased brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, watching the autumn leaves drift across the garden below. The decision to leave his sleek Tribeca loft had come naturally once Eleanor, Sarah, and Lucy became permanent fixtures in his life. They needed a true home, not a monument to his corporate success. "Penny for your thoughts?" Eleanor's voice drew him from his contemplation. She joined him at the railing, her painting smock splattered with the vibrant colors she favored these days. Richard smiled, taking in her appearance. Eleanor's condition hadn't disappeared. There were still difficult days when the fog of her early-onset Alzheimer's closed in, but those episodes had become less frequent since they'd been reunited. Her doctors called it remarkable. Lucy simply called it love. "Just appreciating how much has changed," Richard replied, slipping an arm around Eleanor's waist. 6 months ago I was alone in that glass tower, thinking my life was as complete as it would ever be. Eleanor leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. "And now? Now I wonder how I ever thought that was enough." The sound of laughter drifted up from the garden where Sarah and Lucy were planting bulbs for spring flowers. Martha supervised from a comfortable chair, occasionally offering advice or passing tools. The 3 generations of women had formed a seamless unit, their shared and separate histories weaving together into something new and beautiful. "Sarah's interview is tomorrow," Eleanor reminded him. "She's nervous, though she won't admit it." Richard nodded. After recovering from her ordeal, Sarah had decided to complete the education that had been interrupted by her disappearance. With Richard's encouragement, she'd applied for a position at the Eleanor Hayes Cultural Center, the community arts space he was establishing in Eleanor's name. "She'll be wonderful," Richard said with conviction. Her experience managing that bookstore gave her exactly the skills the center needs. Eleanor watched her daughter and granddaughter in the garden below, her expression thoughtful. "It's strange, isn't it, how Victor's cruelty ultimately led us back to each other. If he hadn't taken Sarah, she might never have moved to that bookstore near your old office. If she hadn't disappeared, Lucy might never have developed her gift for seeing what was hidden." "I'm not ready to give Victor credit for anything good," Richard said, his voice hardening slightly. "But I understand what you mean. Sometimes the path back to where we belong takes unexpected turns." Eleanor touched his face gently. "You're where you belong now. We all are." The wedding had been a small, intimate affair held in the Brownstones' garden 2 months earlier. Eleanor had insisted on a simple ceremony, aware that her condition might make a large formal event overwhelming. Lucy had served as flower girl, beaming with pride as she preceded Eleanor down the makeshift aisle. Sarah had given her mother away, while Martha had stood with Richard, completing their unconventional family circle. Now, as they prepared for their first holiday season together, the brownstone hummed with activity and anticipation. Lucy's drawings had taken on a new character in recent months, less prophetic, more creative. Her latest project was a series of illustrations for a children's book Sarah was writing, a fantastical tale about a girl who could see the invisible threads connecting people's hearts. "Richard, Eleanor," Sarah called from below. "Come see what Lucy found." They made their way down to the garden, where Lucy was carefully extracting something from the soil near the old stone wall that enclosed the property. "Look," she said, holding up a tarnished metal box about the size of a paperback book. "It was buried right here." Richard knelt beside her, examining the unexpected treasure. The box was old, its decorative engraving obscured by decades of corrosion. "Let's get it inside and open it carefully," he suggested. "It might be fragile." In the kitchen, they gently cleaned the box, revealing an ornate Art Deco design and a simple clasp mechanism. Inside, preserved in a waterproof lining, was a collection of letters dated 1923, love notes between the Brownstones' former owners. "How romantic," Sarah said, carefully unfolding one of the yellowed pages. "They were separated during the war and wrote to each other every day." "Just like you and Mom," Lucy observed, looking up at Richard, "except their letters actually got delivered." Richard smiled at the comparison. "I think this house has a history of bringing people together, even when circumstances try to keep them apart." That evening, as they gathered for dinner, Richard surprised everyone with an announcement. "I've been thinking about what comes next for Callaway Enterprises," he began. "I've spent decades building a technology empire, but recent events have made me reconsider what truly matters." "You're not selling the company?" Sarah asked, concern evident in her voice. Richard shook his head. "Not selling, evolving. I'm establishing the Winters Hayes Foundation, funded by 20% of Callaway Enterprises' annual profits. The foundation will support arts education, adoption reform, and medical research focused on early-onset Alzheimer's." Eleanor reached for his hand across the table, her eyes bright with emotion. "Richard, that's wonderful. I want to create something meaningful from what happened to us," he continued. "Victor tried to destroy our family out of jealousy and obsession. The foundation will be a testament to what he couldn't destroy, our capacity for love and forgiveness." "And the cultural center?" Sarah asked. "Will be the foundation's first major project," Richard confirmed, "with you as its director, if you're willing to take on that responsibility." Sarah's expression shifted from surprise to determination. "I'd be honored, but what about my lack of formal qualifications?" "Your life experience is qualification enough," Richard assured her. "Besides, no one understands the mission better than you do." As they discussed plans for the foundation and cultural center, Lucy slipped away to the window seat in the living room, her drawing pad open before her. When Richard went to check on her later, he found her working on a detailed sketch of the brownstone, not as it was now, but as it would be years in the future, surrounded by mature gardens and filled with light. "Another vision?" he asked, sitting beside her. Lucy shook her head. "Not exactly, more like a hope." She added details to the drawing, figures visible through the windows, a swing hanging from the large oak tree, a dog running across the lawn. "This is what I want for us." Richard studied the peaceful scene she was creating. "It looks perfect." "Not perfect," Lucy corrected him. "Real. That's better than perfect." The following week brought the first board meeting of the Winters Hayes Foundation. Richard had converted the brownstone's third floor into a comfortable office space, allowing him to reduce his time at Callaway Tower while still managing his corporate responsibilities. Eleanor joined him for the meeting, determined to participate. Despite having what she called a foggy day, these episodes still occurred, though less frequently, leaving her disoriented and struggling to connect memories. On such days, she often relied on art to express what words couldn't, her paintings becoming a bridge across the gaps in her recollection. "Are you sure you're up for this?" Richard asked gently as they prepared for the board members' arrival. Eleanor arranged her portfolio of concept sketches for the cultural center. "I'm having trouble with some details and names today, but the important things are clear. This foundation matters. I want to be part of it, fog and all." The board Richard had assembled included professionals from education, art therapy, adoption advocacy, and medical research. When he introduced Eleanor as both his wife and the foundation's creative director, she presented her vision with remarkable clarity despite her condition. "Art heals," she explained, displaying renderings of the proposed cultural center. "It connected me to Richard when we were young, kept me grounded when I was alone, and now helps me navigate the foggy days. The center will offer that same healing to others, especially children who need ways to express what they can't say in words." After the meeting, as the board members departed with enthusiastic support for the foundation's initial projects, Richard found Eleanor in their bedroom, suddenly tearful and disoriented, the strain of maintaining focus having finally taken its toll. "I don't remember all their names," she confessed, distressed. "I was trying so hard, but the faces started blurring together." Richard sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "You were magnificent. No one noticed any struggles." "But I noticed," she said softly. "And there will be more days like this, Richard. More fog. Eventually, I might not remember today at all. Then I'll remember for both of us," he promised. "And Lucy will draw it, and Sarah will write about it. We'll hold your memories for you when you can't hold them yourself." Eleanor's smile returned slowly. "I couldn't have imagined this outcome when I was alone in that care facility. Even on My worst days there, I never forgot you completely. Some part of me was always waiting, always hoping. And some part of me was always searching, Richard replied, even when I didn't know what I was looking for. The holidays arrived with a flurry of activity. The brownstone transformed under Lucy's artistic direction, blending traditional decorations with whimsical touches that reflected their unconventional family. Martha, who had initially planned to return to Minnesota, had decided to stay in New York permanently, taking a small apartment nearby so she could remain close while maintaining her independence. On Christmas Eve, they gathered in the living room, the fireplace casting a warm glow over the assembled family. Lucy distributed hand-drawn cards to everyone, each capturing some essential quality of its recipient. Richard showed him not as the corporate titan he had been for decades, but as he was now, a father and husband, surrounded by the family he had nearly lost. "I have an announcement," Sarah said as they finished exchanging gifts. "The police have finally closed the investigation into my disappearance. With Victor's conviction and my formal statement, they consider the case resolved." "That's wonderful news," Martha said, squeezing her daughter's hand. "There's more," Sarah continued. "I've been offered a book deal, a memoir about what happened, about finding my birth parents, and about Lucy's extraordinary gift." "Are you sure you want to revisit all of that?" Richard asked, concerned. Sarah nodded. "I need to tell this story. Not just the parts about Victor's manipulation, but the incredible journey that brought us all together. Lucy's already working on illustrations," she smiled at her daughter. "And I was hoping you and Mom might contribute your perspectives as well." "A family project," Eleanor mused. "I like that idea. On my clear days, I could write about the years I spent searching for something I couldn't name, the emptiness I couldn't explain until I found you again." As the evening progressed, Lucy slipped outside to the garden, drawn by the season's first snowfall. Richard found her there, face tilted up to the gently falling flakes, her breath visible in the cold. "Air to making a wish?" he asked, draping a warm blanket around her shoulders. Lucy smiled, her expression peaceful. "No need, everything I wished for already came true." She turned to look up at him. "Do you think it's really over now? All the bad stuff?" Richard considered her question carefully. "Victor can't hurt us anymore if that's what you're asking. As for the rest..." He looked back at the warm light spilling from the brownstone windows, where Eleanor, Sarah, and Martha were visible through the glass, laughing together. "Life will always have challenges. Your grandmother's condition will have good days and difficult ones. We'll all face obstacles we can't predict, but we'll face them together." Lucy nodded, satisfied with his answer. "I haven't had any warning drawings lately, just regular ones." She paused, a familiar thoughtfulness crossing her face. "But I did draw something this morning that felt important." From her pocket, she withdrew a folded sketch. Richard opened it to find a detailed drawing of the Eleanor Hayes Cultural Center, as it would look when completed. Its doors open wide, children and adults flowing in and out, the building alive with creative energy. "Look at the sign," Lucy prompted, pointing to the entrance in her drawing. Richard read the inscription she had included beneath the center's name: "Where broken paths lead to new beginnings." Emotion tightened his throat. "It's perfect." "That's what this is, isn't it?" Lucy asked. "A new beginning for all of us." Richard nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he found his voice again, he said, "The wisest thing I've ever done was listen to a strange girl in a hotel hallway." Lucy grinned. "The second wisest thing was marrying Grandma Eleanor." "Absolutely correct," Richard agreed, laughing. He offered his hand. "Shall we go back inside? I believe your mother mentioned hot chocolate." As they turned toward the house, Lucy paused for one more look at the gently falling snow. "I'm glad I found you," she said simply. "No," Richard corrected. Her gently. "We found each other. That's the real miracle in all of this." Inside, Eleanor had taken her place at the piano, an unexpected talent that had re-emerged during her therapy. Her fingers moved across the keys with confidence, muscle memory unaffected by her condition. Sarah sat beside her, turning pages of the music, while Martha arranged cups for the promised hot chocolate. Richard and Lucy joined them, completing the circle. As Eleanor played, Richard looked around at these extraordinary women who had transformed his life. His wife, whose love had endured decades of separation. His daughter, whose strength had carried her through unimaginable challenges. His mother-in-law, whose unwavering devotion had given Sarah a loving home. And Lucy, the remarkable child whose gift had brought them all together. Victor Mitchell had spent 23 years trying to destroy what Richard valued most. In the end, he had failed completely. The family that gathered in. The warmth of the brownstone that snowy evening was proof that some bonds couldn't be broken, no matter how cleverly they were attacked. Some connections transcended time, distance, and even memory itself. As the music filled the room and the snow continued to fall outside, Richard felt a sense of completion he had never known in all his years of corporate success. This, he realized, was what he had been building toward his entire life, though he hadn't known it until now. Not an empire of technology and innovation, but a family bound by love, resilience, and the extraordinary gift of a child who could see beyond the visible world to the truth that waited there. Eleanor finished her piece and turned on the piano bench, her eyes finding Richard's across the room. In that moment, her gaze was completely clear, present and filled with love. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, tonight they were exactly where they belonged, together at last. Lucy, ever attuned to the emotional currents around her, began a new drawing. This one showed not the past or the future, but the present moment. The family gathered in the warm